You know what scares me more than any ghost, any demon, any creature from any horror movie I've ever watched late at night with the lights off? It's the moment when something impossible happens right in front of your eyes and your brain just refuses to accept it. And you're standing there completely alone, miles from anyone who could help you. And you realize that whatever is happening, whatever is standing on the other side of that glass, it already knows your name. That's where my story begins. And I need you to stay with me until the very end, because what happened on my third week working the night shift at the medical waste incineration facility is something I have never told anyone in full. Not my wife, not my brother, not the therapist I started seeing 6 months after I quit. Tonight, for the first time, I'm telling all of it, every single detail. Because I think you deserve to know what's actually out there, in the fire, in the dark, in the places where the rest of the world is asleep and something else is very much awake. My name is Daniel. I'm 34 years old. I live in a small town in rural Ohio. And for 14 months, from the fall of one year to the early winter of the next, I worked as a night shift incinerator monitor at a facility that processed medical waste from hospitals, clinics, nursing homes, and laboratories spread across a 3-state region. I took the job because I needed money badly. My wife and I had just had our second child. Our landlord had raised the rent. My previous job at a manufacturing plant had let me go, and the night shift differential pay at the facility was genuinely good. Better than anything else I could find at the time. I told myself it would be temporary. I told myself I would tough it out for 6 months, save enough money to get back on my feet and find something normal during the day. 14 months later, I walked out of that facility at 4:30 in the morning, drove home without stopping, sat in my driveway for 40 minutes, and cried in a way I had never cried before in my adult life. Let me explain what the job actually was before I tell you what happened, because the context matters. The facility operated 24 hours a day. Medical waste doesn't stop being generated just because it's nighttime. Hospitals produce biohazard material around the clock, and that material has to be dealt with. The facility received sealed red bags and yellow containers from medical facilities, everything from used needles and surgical waste to expired pharmaceuticals and laboratory specimens. All of it came in, got logged, got sorted, and eventually got fed into one of 3 large industrial incinerators housed in the main burn building. My job on the night shift was to monitor those incinerators from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. That meant sitting in a control room that looked out through thick reinforced glass windows directly at the burn chambers, watching the temperature gauges, watching the emission monitors, watching the feed systems, and making sure everything was running within the parameters set by federal and state environmental regulations. I also had to do physical walk-arounds every hour, checking the exterior of the units, checking the ash collection systems, logging everything in a paper binder that would later be submitted to the environmental agency. Just me, alone, in a building full of burning medical waste, every single night. There was a training manual they gave me. It was a 3-ring binder about 2 inches thick with a blue cover and the company logo on the front. Most of it was what you'd expect: safety protocols, emergency shutdown procedures, proper protective equipment requirements, maintenance schedules, regulatory compliance checklists. But there was a section near the back, section 12, that was different from the rest. It was only 4 pages long. The header at the top of the first page said Operational Anomaly Protocols, and the first line of text underneath said something that I still think about to this day. It said, and I'm quoting this from memory as accurately as I can, The following protocols exist because certain observations have been reported by monitoring personnel that fall outside standard operational parameters. These protocols are not theoretical. They are based on documented incidents. Follow them exactly. I remember reading that for the first time during my orientation, sitting across the desk from my supervisor, a quiet, heavy-set man named Gerald who had been working at the facility for 11 years and who answered almost every question I had with the shortest possible response. I asked him about Section 12. I asked him what kind of anomalies they were talking about. He looked at me for a moment with an expression that I didn't fully understand at the time, somewhere between tired and careful, and he said, "It's probably nothing you'll ever need to worry about. Just know where to find it." He moved on immediately. I should have pushed harder. I didn't. The rules in Section 12 were as follows. I'm going to go through them carefully because they are important to understanding what happened to me. Rule 1 said that if the flame inside any of the 3 burn chambers changes to an unusual color, defined in the manual as anything other than the expected orange, yellow, or red spectrum, the monitor is to note the time, log the observation, and observe for a period of no less than 5 minutes before taking any additional action. Rule 2 said that if unusual colors persist beyond 5 minutes, the monitor is to reduce the fuel feed to that chamber by 20% using the manual control dial, not the digital interface. It specifically said not the digital interface. I didn't understand why at the time. Rule 3 said that under no circumstances should the monitor tap on, knock against, or make any physical contact with the exterior glass of the observation window during an anomalous flame event. Rule 4 said that if the monitor observes any shape, form, or figure within the burn chamber that does not correspond to the expected burn material load, the monitor is to immediately look away and not look back at that chamber for a minimum of 30 seconds. Rule 5 said that the monitor should never verbally acknowledge anything seen inside the burn chambers while inside the control room. This one baffled me completely when I first read it. Rule 6 was the one that truly unnerved me from the very beginning. It said that if a monitor hears their name spoken from the direction of any of the burn chambers, they are to exit the control room immediately using the south door, proceed to their vehicle, and call the facility emergency line. It said do not look back at the chambers. Do not attempt to investigate. Do not attempt to retrieve personal belongings. Exit immediately. I read all of this during my first week, and I told myself it was probably just some combination of superstition, leftover trauma from whatever previous employees had experienced during psychologically difficult night shifts, and maybe some legal liability protection written in strange language. I told myself that. I repeated it to myself several times over the first few weeks. I needed to believe it because I needed this job, and this job required me to be in that building alone every single night. The first 2 weeks were uneventful, genuinely, almost boringly normal. The incinerators ran. The temperatures held steady. The flames were exactly the color they were supposed to be. Orange and yellow and red, shifting the way fire always shifts, beautiful in a primal way that I actually found calming during those long overnight hours. I would do my walk-arounds on schedule, log my readings, make a thermos of coffee at the small break room adjacent to the control room, and spend the quieter hours reading or listening to podcasts through one earbud while I watched the gauges. I texted my wife every night around 2 a.m. just to tell her I was fine. She worried. I told her it was the most boring job I'd ever had. I actually meant it. The first anomaly happened on a Tuesday night in my 3rd week. I remember it was Tuesday because I had just talked to my wife about her Tuesday night book club, which she had missed because our youngest was fussy, and she was a little sad about it. And we'd had a long conversation about how much she missed having time for herself. And I felt guilty about working nights. And I was sitting there in the control room around 2:50 a.m. carrying that guilt in my chest like a stone when I first noticed the color change. It started small. Chamber 2, the middle one of the three. The flame shifted from its normal orange-yellow toward something greener. Not dramatically, just a tinge at first, the way a candle flame sometimes goes briefly blue or green if there's something unusual in the wick. I almost dismissed it. I had been sitting in that room for almost 4 hours by that point, and my eyes were tired, and the lights in the control room were fluorescent and slightly greenish themselves, and I thought for a moment that I was just seeing the reflection wrong. But I kept watching, and the color deepened. Over the course of about 3 minutes, the flame in chamber 2 shifted into a clear, unmistakable emerald green. Bright and consistent and pulsing with the normal rhythm of the fire, but absolutely, definitively the wrong color for a medical waste incinerator burning at the temperature this one was burning at. I remembered section 12. I looked at the clock. I noted the time in my log, 2:53 a.m. I wrote green flame anomaly observed, chamber 2. I watched it. For 5 minutes I watched it. I want to tell you that those 5 minutes felt normal. They didn't. There was something about the color of that fire that felt deeply, instinctively wrong in a way that bypassed all logical thinking and went straight to some older part of my brain, the part that your ancestors developed living in the open wild where wrong colors meant poison and danger and death. I sat very still. I watched the clock. I watched the flame. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. And then at around the 3-minute mark, I saw the shape. It was in the fire, inside the chamber. You have to understand that I had been watching these chambers for 2 weeks at that point, and I knew what burning medical waste looked like inside those chambers. It's not pleasant, but it's recognizable. Red bags, plastic containers, the organic material inside them, all of it reduced to moving, consuming, shifting fire and gradually to ash. You don't see specific shapes after the first minute or two of a burn cycle. Everything becomes undifferentiated combustion. But this shape was specific. It was tall, taller than it should have been inside that chamber, which I knew was 6 feet high internally. The shape appeared to be standing upright, and it was the color of the green flame, and it was moving, but not the way fire moves. It was moving the way a person moves when they are standing in place and shifting their weight and slowly turning to face you. I remembered Rule 4. Look away. Don't look back for 30 seconds. I looked down at my lap. I stared at my hands. I counted. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. I counted all the way to 35 because I wanted extra margin. My hands were shaking. I was breathing too fast. I counted to 35 and then I looked up. The flame in chamber 2 was orange and yellow, normal. The green was completely gone. The chamber looked exactly as it always did. There was no shape, just fire. Just the normal, expected, unremarkable fire of a medical waste incinerator doing its job in the middle of the night. I sat there for another hour without moving from my chair. I did my 2 a.m. walk around late. I logged everything. I didn't write about the shape. I wrote that the green flame anomaly had resolved after approximately 4 minutes without intervention required. I told myself what I had seen in the fire was pareidolia. That's the thing the human brain does where it finds faces and figures in random patterns. We see faces in clouds. We see animals in wood grain. We see people in fire when we're tired and stressed and it's 3 in the morning and we're alone in a building full of burning medical waste. I told myself that. I went home at 7 a.m. I slept for 6 hours. I went back that night. Nothing happened for 9 days. Long enough that I had almost fully convinced myself that the first incident was fatigue and stress and pareidolia and nothing else. long enough that I was starting to feel comfortable again, starting to feel like the night shift was, in fact, just boring, just long, just a job I was doing for the money and the hours. Then it came back. This time it was chamber 3, and this time the color wasn't green. It was blue, a deep, electric, violet-edged blue that no flame should ever be in a facility like this, not at these temperatures, not burning these materials. I saw it come on over the course of about 90 seconds, and I felt the same immediate animal wrongness, that bone-level awareness that something was off, and I did exactly what Section 12 said. I noted the time. I watched. I kept my eyes on the chamber and I watched. And I want to tell you that I remembered Rule 4. I want to tell you that when the shape appeared again in Chamber 3, I looked away fast enough. I did look away. But before I looked away, in the fraction of a second between when my brain registered what I was seeing and when my eyes actually moved, I saw enough. I saw that it was taller than before, and I saw that it had turned fully toward me, and I saw that whatever was at the top of the shape, where a head would be on a human figure, was inclined slightly downward, the way a person inclines their head when they are looking at something below them, the way you might look down at a small animal, or a child, or something you consider very, very small. I looked at my lap. I counted to 45 this time. I looked up. Normal fire, orange and yellow, nothing wrong. I reduced the fuel feed by 20% using the manual dial, the way Rule 2 said. I don't know why I did it after the fact instead of during the anomaly. I think I was rattled. I think I was scared enough that I just wanted to do something from the manual, to follow a rule, to feel like I had some protocol to follow that might protect me. I called Gerald the next morning before I went asleep. I told him what I had seen both times. There was a long silence on the phone. Then he said, "You followed the rules." I said, "Yes." He said, "Both times?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, good. Keep following them." I asked him what the shapes were. I asked him what caused the color changes. He said, "We don't know exactly. The people who built the facility in the 1980s ran into some of the same observations. It's been logged. It doesn't seem to cause any operational problems as long as the monitor follows the protocols." I asked him if anyone had ever not followed the protocols. There was a very long pause. Then he said, "The protocols exist for a reason, Daniel. Go get some sleep." I didn't sleep well that day. I didn't sleep well for weeks after that. The incident that ended my time at the facility happened 4 months later. By then I had seen the color anomalies 11 times. Chamber 1, Chamber 2, Chamber 3, all three had shown them at various points. The shapes appeared during the longer events, the ones that persisted past the 5-minute mark where I needed to reduce the fuel feed. I had gotten grimly accustomed to the protocol. Look away, count, look back, reduce the feed, log it. Don't talk about it inside the control room. But the night it ended was different because of Rule 6. It was around 3:15 in the morning. All three chambers were running. Chamber 1 had shown a brief green anomaly about 40 minutes earlier that had resolved quickly and hadn't produced a shape. I was logging my readings. I was tired. I was thinking about my daughter's birthday coming up the following weekend. I was completely unremarkable in my own head, just a man doing a boring job in the middle of the night. And then I heard it. From the direction of Chamber 2. Not from inside the chamber, from inside the glass, from inside the fire. From the direction. From somewhere between the chamber and where I was sitting. My name. Not a voice I recognized. Not a voice like any human voice I had heard before, but unmistakably, without any possibility of misinterpretation, unmistakably my name. Daniel. I was out of my chair before I consciously decided to stand up. I went to the south door. I pushed it open. I walked across the parking lot to my car. I sat in my car. I called the facility emergency line. I told the person who answered what I had heard. They said to stay in my car, that someone would be there within an hour, that I had done the right thing. Someone did come. A man I had never met, a supervisor I didn't know from a different region of the company, arrived in 45 minutes. He went into the building alone. He came back out 20 minutes later. He told me the chambers were running fine. He told me I could take the rest of the night off with pay. He told me I had followed the protocols correctly. I quit 6 weeks later. I could not make myself go back into that building after another anomaly event in which the shape in Chamber 1 did not resolve when I looked away at 30 seconds and was still there when I looked back up. Still there. Still standing. Still with that slight downward inclination at the top where the head would be. I still don't know what it was. I still don't know what causes the colors. I know the protocols were written by people who had seen the same things. I know that other monitors before me logged the same observations. I know that whatever is in that fire, whatever looks out through those flames at the person sitting alone in the dark on the other side of the glass, it knows the names of the people watching it. And I know that somewhere right now, tonight, there is a person sitting in a control room very much like the one I sat in, watching those gauges, watching those chambers, and hopping with everything they have that the flames stay orange and yellow and red. And I know that sometimes they don't. Story number 2. Before I tell you what I found inside the pipe, I need you to understand something about the kind of dark that exists inside an industrial boiler at 2 in the morning, because it is not the kind of dark you have ever experienced in your normal life. Not in a blackout, not in a cave tour where they turn off the lights for 30 seconds, not in any bedroom with the curtains drawn. It is a dark that has weight. It is a dark that has temperature and sound and a smell that gets into your throat and stays there for days. It is a dark that makes you aware with a sudden and terrible clarity that you are inside something, that something has closed around you, and that you are very, very far from the opening through which you came. I need you to understand that dark before you can understand anything else I'm going to tell you. My name is Marcus. I'm 29 years old. I live in Houston, Texas, and for 8 months I worked as a boiler wall cleaner at a coal power generation plant on the eastern edge of the city. I am going to tell you everything. The job exists because power plants have boilers and boilers have walls, and those walls accumulate deposits. Slag, clinker. The technical term for what builds up on the inside walls of a large industrial boiler is fouling. And if you let fouling get bad enough, it insulates the walls from the heat of the combustion process, and the whole system becomes inefficient, costs more fuel, produces less power, and eventually breaks down in ways that cost enormous amounts of money to repair. So the walls have to be cleaned regularly. And the cleaning happens inside the boiler by human beings, using tools, on scheduled maintenance windows when the unit has been cooled and locked out and certified safe for entry. At a plant this size, running 3 shifts around the clock, maintenance windows happened at irregular intervals, often at night, often in the early morning hours when power demand was lowest and the plant could afford to take a unit offline, which is why I was regularly inside a boiler at 2 in the morning. Which is why I was there on the night I'm going to tell you about. I want to describe the physical space because, again, this is essential to understanding what I experienced. The main boiler unit I worked in most often was enormous on the outside, a towering rectangular structure of steel and insulation. But on the inside it was a long vertical shaft, roughly the shape of a very tall, very narrow room, maybe 15 feet wide and 12 feet deep, and 60 feet tall from the ash hopper at the bottom to the roof where the flue gas outlets were. Running up the sides of this shaft, covering every inch of the 4 walls from floor to ceiling, were the boiler tubes. Thousands of them. Vertical steel tubes about 2.5 inches in diameter, packed closely together, carrying water that the combustion heat would turn to steam. These tubes were what I cleaned. The fouling built up on the tube surfaces, and my job was to get in there with a pneumatic descaling tool, a long rod with a vibrating head that chipped the deposits off, and work my way systematically across the tube banks from bottom to top, panel by panel, shifting position on the scaffolding between passes. The access point was a man door on the side of the unit, roughly 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall. You went in head first and then pulled your body through. Once you were inside, you could stand on the scaffolding planks that maintenance had set up inside before entry, and you could work in something close to a normal upright posture, though you couldn't spread your arms fully because the tube banks were that close on either side. Moving between scaffold levels meant climbing a steel ladder bolted to one corner of the interior wall. Moving horizontally along a scaffold level meant shuffling sideways through the gaps between tube banks, gaps that were sometimes wide enough for a thin man to pass through sideways, and sometimes were tight enough that you had to exhale and squeeze. But there were also the inspection crawlways. At 3 different levels inside the main boiler unit, there were horizontal pipes, access pipes, roughly 18 inches in diameter, that ran through the boiler structure horizontally and connected to secondary chambers and flue gas paths on the other side. These pipes had always existed, and they were occasionally used for inspection of the internal connections between the main boiler and the adjacent equipment. They were not designed for human beings to spend time in. They were designed for a person to crawl through quickly, check something, and come back. 18 inches in diameter means your shoulders are basically touching both sides simultaneously. You cannot turn your head to either side. You cannot look backward. You can only go forward, or you can go backward by pushing with your feet, which means going in head first means you have to reverse the whole length of the pipe to get out. The pipes were about 40 feet long. We were not supposed to use those crawlways for cleaning work. The descaling of the tube connections at the pipe junctions was supposed to be done by reaching in from the main boiler chamber with extended tool attachments. But on the night this happened, I had been given a specific job by my supervisor, a man named Robert, who had been doing plant maintenance for 23 years and who had the kind of resigned, weathered authority that comes from 2 decades of working inside large machines at odd hours. Robert told me that the junction fouling at the middle crawlway, the one at the second level, was severe enough that extended tool reach wasn't going to get it properly, and that I needed to go in and do a close pass by hand. He told me to take my headlamp and my descaling tool, go in far enough to reach the junction, do the work, and come back out. He estimated it would take maybe 20 minutes. He said he would be on the main scaffold level outside the pipe entrance the whole time. He said he would have a radio. I went in at 1:53 in the morning. I know the time because I checked my watch right before I entered the crawlway, the way I always did out of habit, because inside the boiler you lose track of time in a way that happens nowhere else. The space distorts your sense of time passing. You go in, and when you come out you discover that either far more time has passed than you thought, or far less, but it's almost never the right amount. I checked my watch. 1:53. I went in. The first 15 feet were not bad, uncomfortable but manageable. The headlamp lit the pipe directly ahead of me, a circle of gray steel wall curving up around me, the surface rough with old residue, the smell heavy and metallic and close. I could hear my own breathing amplifying in the enclosed space. I could hear the scraping of my elbows and knees on the pipe surface. I focused on moving forward steadily. I knew the junction I needed to reach was approximately 30 feet in. I kept going. At around 20 feet, something changed. I didn't know exactly what it was at first. It was subtle. It was the air. The air inside the pipe, which up to that point had been still and stale and close but predictable, started moving. Not a lot. Just a very faint, very slow movement, like the barely perceptible movement of air in a room when someone quietly opens a door somewhere on the other side of the house. I stopped. I stayed still for a moment. The air moved past my face again, faintly, steadily, coming from ahead of me, coming from deeper in the pipe. There should not have been any air movement in there. The pipe connected the main boiler chamber to a secondary flue passage on the other side, and both of those spaces were sealed and shut down for maintenance. There was no operational airflow. There was no fan running. There was no pressure differential that should have produced movement. I held still and I felt it again. A slow, steady movement of air from ahead of me, toward me, rhythmic, almost exactly the rhythm of breathing. I told myself it was pressure equalization. Temperature differentials in large sealed metal structures can produce small airflow patterns. I know this is true. I know it has a physical explanation. I told myself that. I kept moving forward. I reached the junction at 32 feet. I could see the fouling deposit on the tube connections, gray and hard and substantial, exactly the kind of buildup Robert had described. I got the descaling tool positioned and I started working, chipping. The sound inside that pipe with the pneumatic tool running was enormous, metallic and echoing, filling every inch of the space around me so completely that I couldn't hear anything else. I worked for about 10 minutes. Then I turned the tool off to clear some of the debris away from the work area and reposition. And in the sudden silence after the tool stopped, in the ringing quiet of the pipe, I heard something. It was ahead of me, beyond the junction. In the section of the pipe between the junction and the far end, the section I was not supposed to go into and had no reason to go into. It was a sound. I am going to be very precise about this because I have replayed it in my mind thousands of times. It was a tapping sound, deliberate, even, spaced about 2 seconds apart, like a finger or something the size and hardness of a finger, tapping slowly and rhythmically on the interior wall of the pipe. Tap, 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 coming from no more than 8 feet ahead of me. I did not move. I do not know how long I stayed completely motionless in that pipe with the descaling tool in my hands and my headlamp pointing forward and the darkness ahead of me where the pipe curved and my light did not reach. I know it was long enough that my arms started cramping from holding the same position. The tapping did not stop. Tap, tap, tap. Even and deliberate and close, I called out for Robert. I called as loud as I could, which in the enclosed space of the pipe was very loud. Robert, I'm inside. I need you to come to the entrance. I waited. The tapping continued. Robert did not answer. I called again. The radio crackle should have let me hear him even through the pipe wall if he spoke loudly enough. Nothing. Just the tapping. I want to tell you that I'm a rational person. I want to tell you that I have a calm disposition and I don't panic easily, and I have worked in tight spaces and in industrial environments in the dark for years without losing my head. All of that is true. And I want to tell you that what I decided to do next was the result of calm, rational assessment of my situation. I started moving backward. I kept my headlamp pointed forward. I pushed with my feet and moved backward through the pipe, inch by inch, watching the section ahead of me, watching the edge of my headlamp's reach, watching the curve beyond which I couldn't see. And as I moved backward, the tapping stayed at the same distance from me, 8 feet. I moved back 3 feet, tapping at 8 feet. I moved back another 3 feet, tapping at 8 feet. It was keeping pace with me. It was matching my movement, staying exactly 8 feet ahead, maintaining the distance. I moved faster. I stopped being careful. I scraped my elbows and my knees, and I hit my head against the top of the pipe hard enough to see stars, and I did not slow down. The tapping stayed with me, faster now, matching my speed exactly. 8 feet, always 8 feet. I don't know how I covered the last 12 feet of the pipe because I genuinely do not have a clear memory of it. I remember seeing the gray rectangle of the man door opening at the far end of the crawlway. I remember pulling myself through the pipe exit onto the scaffold platform. I remember Robert standing there looking at me with an expression on his face that I can only describe as the look of a person who is carefully not showing what they are feeling. I grabbed him by the arm and I said something was in the pipe. I said there was tapping. I said it was following me. I was not calm. I was not a rational person at that moment. I was a 29-year-old man who had just crawled backward through 40 feet of pipe in the dark while something kept pace with him 8 feet away. Robert did not look at the pipe entrance. That's the thing I noticed first. He was looking at me. He was not looking at the pipe. He should have looked at the pipe. He should have been curious, alarmed, wanting to see. He didn't look at it. He put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Did you finish the junction work?" I stared at him. I said, "Robert, something is in there." He said, "Did you finish the junction work?" I said, "Yes, the work was done." He nodded. He said, "Okay, let's pack up." We packed up. We went back to the equipment room. I told Robert what I had heard in full detail, the air movement, the tapping, the way it kept pace with me. He listened. He didn't say anything until I was finished. Then he said, "This plant has been running for 40 years. Big machines have sounds that don't have easy explanations." He said it the way a person says something they have said before, rehearsed. "Careful," he said, "you did the right thing leaving when you did." I asked him what that meant. He said, "There's old equipment in this facility, old pipes, old chambers. Some of it goes back to the original construction. Some of the maintenance records from the first 20 years of operation are incomplete." He stopped. He looked at his hands. He said there were accidents in the early years. This type of plant. Workers in confined spaces. He stopped again. He said, "Some things don't leave a place." He said it very quietly. I don't think he meant to say it. I think he had been carrying that line for a long time and it slipped out in the way that things slip out when you're tired and it's 2 in the morning and the person in front of you just came out of a pipe looking the way I looked. I went back inside the pipe one more time. 2 weeks later, a different junction, a different scheduled maintenance. Robert wasn't there that night, a different supervisor. I went in 14 feet and the air started moving again. I backed out. I told the supervisor the extended tools could reach the junction with some additional effort. He shrugged and said, "Fine." I never went back in any of the crawlways after that. I finished my 8 months at the plant. I left for a different position that paid less and involved no confined spaces whatsoever. On my last night at the plant, I walked through the boiler floor alone at the end of my shift, the big unit offline and cold and dark, and I stopped in front of the crawlway entrance, the middle one, the second level, the one I had backed out of that night. I stood there and I listened, and after about 30 seconds I heard it, very faint, barely there, but there, tap, 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 from somewhere far inside. I walked away. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I walked to my car and I drove home and I slept with every light in my apartment on. I don't work in confined spaces anymore. I don't go into spaces I can't turn around in. I know what it feels like to be 8 feet away from something you cannot see, in a space too tight to turn your head, knowing that no matter how fast you move backward, it will stay exactly 8 feet away. I know what it sounds like when something that should not be there taps slowly and patiently on the inside of a pipe in the dark. I know it's still there in that pipe at that plant, on the eastern edge of Houston. And I know that right now, tonight, some other worker on some other maintenance window might be crawling in there with a headlamp and a tool, counting the feet, approaching the junction, not knowing to be afraid of the air that starts moving before you get there. And I know that tapping is already waiting for them. Story number 3. I need you to listen to me very carefully right now, because what I'm about to tell you is something that I know sounds impossible, and I know the word impossible gets thrown around too easily in stories like this. So let me be precise. I'm not saying I don't understand the explanation. I'm not saying the rational part of my brain hasn't spent 2 years trying to construct an explanation. I am saying that what I saw was a man standing behind me in the mirror, close enough that I could see the color of his shirt, and when I turned around, nobody was there. And it happened not once, not twice. It happened on 17 separate nights over 4 months. And the last time it happened, the man in the mirror smiled. That is what I'm here to tell you about tonight. My name is Eli. I'm 31 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington. From January through late April of one year, I worked as the night shift janitor at a mid-sized commercial gym in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle. It was the kind of gym that was busy and loud and full of people during the day and early evening, and then at around 10 p.m. became something else entirely. I worked alone. The hours were 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. 7 hours in a 45,000 square foot facility that during those hours contained no one but me. No trainer. No front desk person. No manager doing late paperwork. Just me and the cleaning equipment. And approximately 220 mirrors covering the walls of every room in the building. I took the job for the same reason most people take jobs with hours like that. Money was tight. I had recently ended a long relationship and moved into a studio apartment by myself for the first time in 4 years, and the financial adjustment was harder than I had expected. The night shift differential was the deciding factor. That and the fact that the job involved no social interaction, which at that particular point in my life felt like a feature rather than a drawback. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be left alone with my work and my headphones and my thoughts. A gym at 3 in the morning seemed like it would give me that. It did. For the first month, it gave me exactly that. I had a routine. I came in at 11, signed in on the employee tablet by the door, got the cleaning cart from the supply room, and started in the cardio room on the east side of the building. I worked my way methodically through the facility, room by room. Cardio room, free weights room, machine weights room, 2 group fitness studios, men's locker room, women's locker room, bathrooms, front lobby, racquetball court. And finally, the main stretching and open floor area at the center of the building, which was the room with the most mirrors. Floor to ceiling on 3 of the 4 walls. Full wall panels, edge to edge. The kind of mirrors that gyms use so people can watch their form, which means wherever you stand in that room, you can see yourself from multiple angles, and you can see a large portion of the rest of the room reflected back at you. And reflections of reflections, and it goes back and back the way mirrors facing each other do, into a corridor of diminishing copies of yourself that gets darker and less distinct the further back it goes. I mopped that room last every night, around 4:30 in the morning. Saved it for last because the floors were light-colored and showed footprints, and I wanted the least possible traffic after mopping. The first time I saw the man was on a Thursday in early February. I know it was Thursday because I remember that I had been listening to a podcast I always listen to on Thursdays, a weekly release, and it had just gone to an ad break when I looked up. I was in the stretching room, mopping. The overhead fluorescents were on, but only half of them. The way I kept it because the full bank was too bright at 4 in the morning for a room I was just mopping, not using, and the reduced lighting was fine for the work. I was mopping in a slow, even pattern, pushing the mop away from me and drawing it back, watching the wet shine spread across the light-colored floor, not thinking about anything much. And I looked up. Directly in front of me was one of the large mirror panels. And in the mirror over my left shoulder, approximately 4 feet behind me and slightly to my left, there was a man standing. He was wearing a dark gray shirt. He was my height approximately or slightly taller. He was standing still, completely still, facing my direction. He was not a reflection of me. He was a separate figure behind me in the mirror. I could see my own reflection clearly in the center of the mirror, and I could see him behind me and to the left, and we were two different people. I turned around. There was nobody there, empty floor. The rest of the lights in the building were on their normal setting, and from the stretching room you could see through the glass walls into the adjacent machine weights room, which was empty. There was nowhere a person could have gone in the fraction of a second it took me to turn around. No door, no corner. No space between equipment that a full-grown person could hide in without being visible. I turned back to the mirror, just me, just my reflection, pale and tired and holding a mop at 4:30 in the morning. I spent the next 20 minutes in that room finishing the mopping and trying very hard not to look at the mirrors. I didn't succeed completely. I looked in the quick, involuntary way you look at something that scared you, checking to see if it's still there. It wasn't just me. I told myself what any reasonable person tells themselves: trick of the light, fatigue. I had been awake since the previous morning. I worked a night schedule that my body had never fully adjusted to, and I was alone in a large, empty building at 4 in the morning. The human brain under those conditions produces tricks. It's documented. It's explainable. I went home that morning, I slept, I went back the next night and nothing happened, and by the end of that second night I had almost completely put it out of my mind, but it happened again. 6 nights later, same room, same time, same position over my left shoulder, 4 feet back, dark gray shirt. I turned around and nobody was there. I looked back at the mirror and he was gone. 6 nights after that, it happened again, and then 4 nights after that, and then 3 nights after that. It was accelerating. The intervals between occurrences were getting shorter, and with each occurrence the figure in the mirror was slightly different, not dramatically, subtly. The third time I noticed that the figure appeared to be slightly closer than before, not 4 feet, maybe 3.5. The fourth time, closer still. By the 7th occurrence, the figure in the mirror was close enough that I felt, with a horrible intuitive certainty, that if the mirror were a window, the figure would be close enough to reach through it and touch my shoulder. I started keeping a log, not because I was a particularly organized person, but because logging it felt like a way of asserting control over something that felt profoundly outside my control. I wrote down every date, every time, everything I noticed about the figure. What the figure was wearing changed sometimes. It was almost always dark clothing, but the shade varied: gray, dark blue, once what appeared to be black. The figure always appeared over my left shoulder, never the right, never in front of me, always behind me to the left, visible in the mirror and gone when I turned. I started doing things to test it. I know that sounds stupid. People always say that about horror stories. Why would you test it? Just leave. But this was my job. I needed the money. And there was a part of me that genuinely wanted a rational explanation, that was searching for a rational explanation, that was willing to do slightly uncomfortable things in pursuit of that rational explanation. So I tested. I tested the lighting. I tested different positions in the room. I mopped facing different directions. I put my back to the far wall so that when I looked up at the mirror I could see the entire room behind me, and there would be nowhere for a person to stand behind me that wasn't visible. I did this on the 9th occurrence. I positioned myself with the entire room behind me, no blind spots, my back against the wall, and I looked at the mirror. He was there, against the wall, right behind me, where my back was. Right there in the mirror, where there was physically no space for anyone to stand because I was standing against that wall myself. And he was standing behind me in the mirror, and there was no room for him to be there, and the wall was against my back and he was there. I left the room immediately. I did not turn around. I finished the rest of my shift with the stretching room door closed and the light off, and I didn't go back in. I considered quitting. I genuinely considered it. But I thought about my rent, and I thought about the fact that the figure had never, across 9 occurrences, done anything beyond standing there. It appeared. It watched me, apparently. It disappeared when I turned. It had never made a sound, never moved, never done anything beyond being present. I told myself that something that only stood there and watched was perhaps something I could coexist with, the way you can coexist with a noise in your walls or a shadow in your peripheral vision that resolves to nothing when you look at it directly. I told myself that. I went back the next night. The log entries for occurrences 10 through 16 are similar. The figure in the mirror, left shoulder, gone when I turned, getting closer. By occurrence 14, the figure appeared to be close enough in the mirror that the distance between us was maybe 2 feet. So close that I could see, in the dim reflected light of the half-lit room, that the figure had a face. I could not make out specific features. The lighting and the distance and the quality of the reflection made it blurry, but it was a face, tilted slightly forward, directed at me. Occurrence 17 was the last one. It was a Monday night in late April. I was mopping the stretching room. I had, by that point, stopped keeping the lights half on in that room. I had gone back to the full bank because I wanted more light. Even though more light meant more visible mirror surface. More light felt safer than less light, even though the logic doesn't quite hold if you think about it carefully. Full lights. Mop. 4:22 in the morning. I know because I checked my phone right before it happened. I looked up at the mirror. The man was there, over my left shoulder. Close, closer than he had ever been before. Close enough that in the mirror the distance between us appeared to be perhaps a foot. Close enough that if the mirror were a window, I could have reached through it and put my hand on his chest. He was wearing a dark blue shirt this time. His face was visible, still blurry but more defined than before, the way something out of focus becomes clearer when it gets nearer. I could see the shape of his face. I could see that his face was directed at me, completely at me. And I could see, clearly and unmistakably and with no possible misinterpretation, that he was smiling, not a normal smile. Not the smile of a person who is happy to see you. The smile of something that has been waiting for a very long time and has just decided that the waiting is finished. That kind of smile. I turned around. I am telling you with my full honesty and my full acknowledgement of how impossible this sounds that when I turned around and there was nobody behind me, and I turned back to the mirror, he was still there. Still in the mirror. Still smiling. I was looking at the mirror and I was looking at my own reflection and I was looking at the figure standing 1 foot behind my reflection, and the figure was still there even though there was nobody behind me in the room. That had never happened before. Every previous time, turning around made him disappear from the mirror. Turning back and he was gone. Not this time. He was in the mirror and he was still there and he was smiling, and I was standing in a lit room alone with a mop at 4:22 in the morning looking at something that should not exist. I put the mop against the wall. I walked out of the room without running because I made a conscious decision not to run. I don't know why that felt important, but I walked to the supply room. I put my jacket on. I picked up my bag. I walked out the front door of the building. I sat on the sidewalk in the cold Seattle air for about 10 minutes, and then I called my manager and I left a voicemail saying I was not coming back, that he should mail my final check, and that I was sorry for the short notice. I have not been in that gym since. I don't walk past it if I can avoid it. I know there's a new night shift janitor there now, because I checked the facility's social media once and they had a post about their overnight cleaning team. I wondered if I should reach out to whoever it was. I wondered if I should say something. I don't know what I would say. I don't know how you tell a stranger that the stretching room has a man in the mirrors that gets closer every time he appears, that the last time I saw him he was smiling, that you should not let him get comfortable with your presence the way I did. I think about that smile a lot. I think about what the smile meant. Whether it meant he had been getting closer on purpose, closing the distance deliberately over those 17 occurrences, heading towards some conclusion that my leaving interrupted. Or whether it meant something else, something I like even less when I think about it in the middle of the night, which is that he wasn't watching me specifically. That the job of the figure in the mirror, whatever and whoever the figure is simply to watch whoever is in that room. That the current night shift janitor, right now, tonight, at some point in the quiet of 3 or 4 in the morning, will look up from their mop and see something over their left shoulder in one of those big wall mirrors. And that it will be close, because it doesn't have to start over, because I already let it get close, because whatever ground it covered with me, it doesn't lose. Don't look in the mirrors when you're alone.